Hey friends, this is Michaela here at Heartscapes, living, learning, and loving from the inside out. And today I am navigating a question. And that question is, how do I know, how do we know if an impulse that I have is my intuition talking to me, or if it is a subconscious fear or a limiting belief or the residue of trauma or the expectations of other people speaking to me? How do I know I can trust that impulse and follow it with confidence? And I'm now getting this question because this is a question that I get asked probably the most often since I have been incorporating intuition and the kind of the exploration and study of intuition into my teachings and my circles here, because it's a really important and tricky question. Because we get impulses and thoughts and desires all the time. And some of them are intuition talking. Or as we would say from the perspective of Reiki, it's our true self talking, our true self guiding us in the direction of greater wholeness and connection. But sometimes those impulses or those voices are something else entirely. They're, being motivated from parts of ourselves that are afraid or are limited or are stuck in old patterns or stuck in traumatized places. And those voices can be very strong, sometimes stronger than our true intuition, at least louder. And so how do we know? How do we know? And how do we follow those voices with confidence? And it's a question that does not have a straightforward answer. It doesn't have one single answer. And it's a question that I have been exploring and experimenting with in my own practice for a long time. So while I'm not an expert and I don't claim to have the right or perfect answer to this question, I have some strategies for how we can explore it. And I have some answers that are right for me that I enjoy sharing with folks. So this is the question that we'll be exploring in this coming Intuition Lab. That is coming up on Wednesday, January 6th. Our Intuition Lab is held every Wednesday, first Wednesday of the month at 10 a.m. Pacific time online. And it's a place where we experiment with questions related to how we understand our intuition, how we can come into greater relationship with it, and significantly, how we can build it and develop it so that it can be truly trustworthy and strong inner guide and our compass for us as we navigate the difficulties and the opportunities, the challenges and the joys of our lives. So we'll be exploring that question, and I really look forward to digging into it with folks. And so just for today on this video, I wanted to share a project that I did recently that was part of what sparked this question for me. And it was a project, an art project related to Christmas that I was invited to participate in through a local church that I've been involved with. And it was a project that asked us to consider different aspects of the Christmas story and to find meaning of those aspects of the story in our lives today. And while I'm not identified as a Christian, I'm really intrigued by the way in which stories and mythologies and these kinds of imaginal structures that guide our lives and our relationships with each other and with the world, how they can serve as practical guides for us. It's a question that I'm really interested in. So I was happy to participate in this. And the part of the Christmas story that I chose to work with was the moment when Mary was visited by the angel Gabriel and told this impossible, difficult, unbelievable thing, that she would become pregnant and bear the Son of God and give birth to this child who would grow up to be the leader of nations and be a spiritual teacher of many people. And she was afraid, and she felt unworthy, and there was probably significant parts of her that was just rejecting this entirely. Like, this is too much, it's too big, I don't want this. But there was something else inside of her that was saying yes. There was something inside of her that knew that this impossible, difficult, huge thing was also good and right. And so she said yes, and she willingly took on this interesting experiment, this task. And the story unfolds from there. And so I was really interested in those moments in our lives when we're confronted with something that feels impossible or difficult or too big or something we are unworthy of. And we have every reason in the world to walk away or to say no or to, just not even paying attention because it feels so out of bounds for us. But there's something inside of us that recognizes this thing as right and good, recognizes this thing as something that will move us in the direction of more wholeness, more connection, more manifestation of who we truly are in the world, whatever that looks like. And so we say yes. We say yes to considering this thing, to dreaming this thing, to taking action in the world to making this thing happen. And then over time, we can observe the outcomes of that yes, of both the energy of the yes, that energy of saying yes to something that feels difficult and impossible, and also the actual, logistical, physical, practical, pragmatic outcomes of taking action in service of that yes. And I'll just pause here and say that when I say saying yes to something, what I mean is saying yes to goodness and wholeness, saying yes to our life, which sometimes means actually saying no to something. So this category of the good and big and impossible yes also includes things like saying no to an abusive relationship, saying no to taking on a responsibility that's not right for us, saying no to bearing children when that's not the right thing for us to do. So when I say saying yes, what I mean is like that yes to our life, that yes to our greater good, that yes to the greater good of that will serve all of life. Because of course, when we're truly serving our own good, we're doing something that is in service to all of life because we're interconnected. So as I was thinking about how to bring this message or explore this message in an art piece, as I often do in these sorts of projects, I turned to community and I asked the question generally to quite a few people. I asked, tell me about a time in your life when you were confronted with something that felt impossible or difficult or huge, but also right and good, and you said yes. And I was so touched and overwhelmed by the more than 60 responses that came back to me. And beautiful stories of saying yes to all sorts of things. And many people shared some of the outcomes, some of the things that happened as a result of that yes. And it felt like this just tremendous, resource, this wellspring of the energy of yes, what I started calling, the difficult, good yes. And so I took each of those things that was shared with me and I prayed over them and I created a ritual around them to just amplify that energy, to just, affirm it in the world. And as part of that ritual, I took each of those over 60 responses and I inscribed them on a fabric feather here and wove those feathers into these angel wings that are behind me. And you can kind of see how that came together there. And it was a really fun thing to do and it felt really good and I really liked the product that came out of it. And as I was working this question of how do we know when it's the right thing to say yes to, right? Especially if it's big and huge and feels impossible, right? And the answer was we know when we're following our intuition. that it is that special alchemy of our heart and our gut and our mind and our spirit and the interactions between those things and the world around us. That's the formula for our intuition. It is that connected entity of those things that is at work in us, is trying to work within us all the time. But, in special moments like that, we can feel it and hear it so acutely, and so much so that we can respond to something that feels impossible. And so I'm starting to cycle back with folks and ask, so how did you know? How did you know that it was the right thing to say yes to this impossible thing? And it's been really, lovely and amazing and surprising, but also completely not surprising to hear the ways in which people are describing the way their intuitions speak to them. Describing the ways in which they know that they are receiving a message, receiving a voice that is from their true self, that is reflecting their highest good and their greatest healing and the greater good of all life around them, whether or not they're conscious of that part. And so much so that they choose to say yes. So sometimes we really only know that in retrospect. Sometimes when we say yes, we don't know if it's the right thing. Or we don't know if the outcome is actually going to be right and good. So sometimes the answer to the question of how do I know it's truly my intuition, sometimes we can really only answer that after the fact in looking at the outcomes. Because our intuition will always, always steer us to outcomes that cause us to be more whole, more healed, more connected, more resourced, more resilient, more loved, more compassionate, more connected to ourselves and to each other and to the web of life around us. So, my invitation to you is twofold. First is to join us on January 6th, Wednesday, a week from this coming Wednesday, for Intuition Lab, where we'll dig into this question even further. I'll put the link below on how you can join us. It's a free monthly gathering. And secondly, I invite you to think about your own impossible, difficult, good, and right yes. Think about a time when you said yes to something that felt like that. And spend a little bit of time reflecting on the outcomes. What happened as a result of that yes? And how did you know that it was the right thing to do? How did you know to make the choice to say yes in that moment? And that information will be unique to you. It will give you information about how your intuition speaks to you. And that information might be relevant to other people also, or it might not. It might be very particular to you. But either way, I would love to hear about it. So I'd love for you to share with me anything that comes from that exploration. And in the meantime, until I see you again, I am curious, what are you navigating? And may you be provisioned for your navigation home.